Welcome everyone to Coachology in 20, where we discuss Coachology concepts in 20 minutes. Now, I'm not too sure what's going on. Apologies, I'm a little bit late. StreamYard has updated the software we use to present, has made a lot of updates over the past week. So the intro video hasn't played, and also the setting and the layout here is not as custom. So we'll try something new. We'll go with it. I've still got the content. I've still got the presentations. I can see we've got Adele tuned in. Adele, thank you so much for being here. So if you're new to Coachology in 20, this is where we discuss coaching concepts in 20 minutes. So if you're new to coaching, grab your notepad, grab your tablet, whatever it is you like to take notes and learn something new. If you're an experienced coach, I'd love to hear your thoughts, your wisdom. Please share what you'd like to share in the comments chat. I like to make these sessions as engaging as possible. Welcome, the Shiran Network. Thank you so much for being here, Shiran. Good to see you. Okay, so what are we going to be looking at today? We're going to be looking at reflecting back to clients in coaching. One of the most important, fundamental of the 8 key skills that we have as a coach that we touched upon earlier in our Coachology in 20 series. So reflecting back to clients. It's an important skill that we need to understand how to approach this in our coaching sessions. But as always, I'm going to open up with a question for you. What do you think we mean? So when we talk about reflecting back, we also use the word feedback a lot in coaching. But the question I have for you is, what do you think we mean by feedback in coaching? Hello, it's good to see you here. Thank you so much for tuning in. What do you think we mean by feedback in coaching? And then I'm going to introduce you to 3 important rules whenever we're looking at feedback, whenever we look at reflecting back to our clients in our coaching sessions. And then we're going to look at 5 key principles that sit behind that, some examples we can use, and the difference between reflection and opinion, which is very important to understand as a coach. What do you think we mean by feedback in coaching? Is this about telling our clients that they've done a great job? Give them constructive feedback on what they can improve going forward? Okay, saying back to a client what we think we have heard or observed. Okay, brilliant. You've summarized that in a nutshell. Thank you so much for sharing that. So it's not about sitting there and giving constructive feedback, applauding the client, telling them what they're doing really well, telling them what they can improve upon. When we talk about feedback in terms of in our coaching sessions, it's like Oge's summed up there. It's saying back to a client what we think we've heard or observed. I get my words right. So it's all about reflecting back. And there's 3 important rules that we must remember when we're reflecting back in our coaching sessions. The first rule is feedback is not about giving our opinions, thoughts, and our advice. It's not about judgment. It's not about listening to everything that the client's sharing with us and then telling them what they need to do from there, or turning what we're hearing into assumptions, using words like I think, I feel, and giving our opinion back to the coach. That's not what we do when we give feedback and we reflect back to our clients. Second is feedback must be proportionate and balanced. Now, coaches can fall into the trap. What do I mean by this? Coaches can fall into the trap of either giving too little feedback and reflection in their coaching sessions or giving too much. So if you fall on one side of the scales and you're not giving enough feedback, then it might show that you're not listening. It might show that you're not paying attention. You might lack clarifying certain points or information that the client's sharing with us, and it will feel more like an interrogation rather than a coaching session. So we don't want to not give any feedback and just ask question after question after question after question. Equally, we don't want to be on the other side of the scales where we're just reflecting every single word back, where it becomes like a recorder, a repetition that is feeding everything back, because that dilutes the coaching session. It makes it not feel natural and authentic, and it's just too much. We'll be talking too much as a coach in that space. So we need to have it proportionate, and it needs to be balanced. We need to have the right amount of feedback throughout those coaching sessions. Not too little, not too much. And the third important point is to remember that our role is to act as a mirror. We're there to act like a camera. So we take the picture of what we're observing and we show it back to our clients. We're not sitting there with a paintbrush and painting a picture or an image of what we think we've heard with our own assumptions, with our own judgment. So our role when reflecting back to a client and giving feedback to a client is to act as a mirror. And acting as a mirror can be very powerful. This could be the first time that your client is sharing this information with anybody. It might be the first time they're saying it out loud. So just repeating those words back to them in their own language, using their own metaphors, can be really powerful for their self-awareness and self-discovery. So those are the 3 important points. It shouldn't contain it's not about giving our opinions, our assumptions, our judgment. Our role is to act as a mirror, and it needs to be proportionate and balanced. So those are 3 important rules when reflecting back to clients. Sitting behind these rules, there's also 5 key principles that we must remember as a coach. The first one is we reflect back with a positive intention. We have to remember that the purpose of reflecting back is for growth. It's not to criticize. So any negative reflection back is not going to help move the client forward. Everything we need to do needs to be with a positive intention, and that's to help the client grow. We're not there to give criticism. The second is we reflect only what we have heard or what we've observed. So we don't go back and give our assumptions, we don't give our opinions, we don't say I think, I feel. Very important that we play back what we heard, and we play it back in their language and using their metaphor. So use the words that they use. Sometimes when we try and paint our picture, and it's okay to do this to clarify, but we need to, when we paint in our version or what we think we're hearing, we need to, when we're asking that clarification question, we need to make sure that it's free of any assumptions and any judgment. Sometimes when we're trying to understand the client and we're trying to digest it ourselves, we can turn it in, our biases can creep in, our judgment can creep in, our assumptions can creep in. So it's really good to try and remain objective and neutral and play back the words that we've heard, remembering the words that we've heard and playing it back to them. Remember, our role is to be a mirror. The third, is this the third or the second? I should have labeled these. Third, this is the third one. So I'm on track again. So it is an observation of information and not an opinion. So again, there's a huge difference between saying, I think you should do this, and I've noticed you said. I've noticed you said is sharing what we've observed, the information that we observed. It's not giving our opinion. We're not telling them what we think they should do or what you feel from the information that they've shared. So it's very important that it's an observation of information and not an opinion. The fourth principle is it is constructive or beneficial for the client. So again, this is where I mentioned earlier on, a lot of coaches can fall into giving too much in terms of how much they're reflecting back every piece of information before they ask their questions. So a coach that falls into this category will be a coach that really feeds back everything before they ask a question. They give a lot of detailed information and then they get to the question. Sometimes that doesn't work. Remember, we need to keep balanced and proportionate when we're giving feedback back. And giving too much information can overwhelm and also confuse the client as well. So we need to intelligently and using our intuition, choose which pieces of information to feed back. But those pieces of information, they need to be constructive or beneficial for the client. Very, very important to think about that. It needs to be moving the client forward, not just a case of stating it back to the client for the sake of showing that we're listening and showing that we're understanding. At times, it's good to do that for clarification, but we shouldn't be always doing that. The reflection needs to be constructive and move the client forward. And last, and probably one of the most important principles as well, is that it needs to end with a question for the client to consider. If we're finishing our reflection back, our feedback to the client without a question, then that's just a statement and it's not going to move the question forward. So anything we're reflecting back, it needs to finish with a question. Even if that question is just to ask, have I understood that correctly? We just asked the question to help them and make sure that we've understood. I'm going to come back to the comments, see if anything's been shared here. So Adela's saying, avoid saying it sounds like. So I'm going to get onto that in a moment, Adele, but that's a very, very important point to note. It sounds like. Because again, it sounds like there is inserting our assumption. There's better ways in which we can present that in terms of our feedback. And we're going to look at a couple of examples today. So we're going to do a little bit of an exercise. So we need to understand as a coach the difference between stating our opinion when we're reflecting back to our clients and also turn that into a reflection. So when are we reflecting back? When we're acting as a mirror, and when are we painting our own picture and playing it back to the client? So I'm going to give you an opinion, and what I'd like you to do is write in the comments box how that might look like as a reflection. Welcome, Donna. It's good to see you here. Thank you so much for being here. I can see we've got a spike of people who's just tuned in. If you're tuned in, we're just going through the importance of reflecting back to clients in our coaching sessions and how we should do this as a coach, avoiding assumptions, opinions, judgment. So it's all about observing what we've heard and what we see. So Rosanna is saying, what about when we observe patterns? That's fine for us to introduce observing of patterns, but as long as we're keeping it objective, we're completely neutral, and we'll have a look at a few statements in a second. But if you're observing patterns, it's how you do that in a way that's not an assumption. So it could be something like, I've noticed every time we talk about this person, your body language drops. We talked about this when we looked at observing body language with patterns. Or every time we talk about this, we're digressing and we end up talking about this. We can reflect back the patterns that we observe, but we still need to do it in a neutral way where we're acting as a mirror, not as a person that's holding a brush and painting our own picture. So really good question, Rizan. So I'm going to give you an opinion, and what I'd like you to do in the comments box is just write how that might look as a reflection in our coaching space. So I'm keeping them nice and simple. So I think you should. Now this is opinion. We should never do this in our coaching space. We should never reflect back the information that we've heard with I think you should. Do this, do that, do that. Remember, as a coach, we don't give advice. How might we rephrase that? What might be a way that if we've noticed something that's being shared, how might we introduce this in a way that's reflecting back as a mirror? This is a good exercise if you're a coach that finds yourself using the words I think. We observe this a lot of coaching minds when we're assessing our coaches through our level 5 program. There's a lot of coaches that fall into the trap of I think. Whether it's I think you should, or I think from what you've told me, or I feel, is another one that we see a lot. But how can we turn this into something a bit more of a mirror? I think you should. So put it into a bit of a context. Somebody's sharing important information with you. One of our clients is sharing a lot of information. Adonna's saying, what would you like to happen? What would you like to happen? Yep, that's a question. It's reflecting back. What could or what might? That's really good, Augusto. What could or what might? Good way to, Augusto, sorry, okay. That's a really good one, yep. So what I've got on the screen, there's lots of ways in which we can approach this. So this is thinking about how we open our reflection back to our clients. What's the first words that we use? So we're avoiding the words I think, I feel. So it could be something like, I noticed you said. It could be, what would you like to happen, as Donna shared. It could be what could or what might. So those are all good examples and ways in which we can open our reflection. The next one, I'm giving you another opinion. You seem angry. So we've got a client that's in the session that seems a bit angry. Maybe our intuition is telling them they're angry. Maybe they're getting a bit heated when they're sharing their information. How might you introduce this observation into the space in a way that reflects back through a mirror, rather than telling them, because as an opinion, you seem angry, rather than telling them that you think they're angry? Donna, excellent. I've noticed a shift. And then it could be, I've noticed a shift in your energy. I've noticed a shift in your tone. I've noticed a shift in your body language. August is saying, I noticed some anger or frustration here. Brilliant. Del saying, what emotions are you experiencing? Again, we're putting a question. That's really great, Del, as well. What emotions are you experiencing right now? Yep. So you're all on the right lines, which is excellent. So something like, I'm hearing frustration. Is that correct? Is that right? So again, if we're using intuition, we're feeling that there's a bit of anger, a bit of frustration, maybe a bit of sadness. It could be any emotion. We can ask them, as Adele mentioned, what emotions are you experiencing right now? So we're not calling it out, But if we hear and we'll feel like there's a lot of frustration in there, it's always good to ask a clarity question. I'm hearing a lot of frustration. Is that correct? I'm hearing a lot of frustration when we talk about X, Y, Z. Is that correct? So we're asking, we're clarifying, we're feeding back what we're feeling from the session, what we're observing, and we're seeing if that is correct. So great stuff. Or Donna's mentioned, I've noticed a shift. Maybe there's a shift in the energy when we talk about a certain topic. So brilliant stuff. Next one. Here is what I would do. Remember, we don't do this as a coach. This is an opinion. So you've got a scenario here where a client shared a lot of information. They've got a problem. They've got a challenge. They've got lots of obstacles. They cannot seem to see a way forward. Maybe they've even asked you for advice. You get a lot of clients that don't fully understand what coaching is all about, and they ask you for advice. Coaches that are inexperienced would jump in and say, here's what I would do in your situation. Here's what I would do to overcome this obstacle. This is not coaching. As coaches, we don't give advice. We don't tell the clients what they should be doing. So what could be a different way we could approach this? Augusto is saying, sorry, I keep calling you Augusto. I'm sorry, Oge. I don't know why I keep seeing Oge Austin, and my mind's going there. And I've been talking to Augusto a bit today as well. So my mind's going there. Apologies. What are some options you could look at here? Really great one there. Thank you, Oge. Donna is saying, what options, resources are available to you? Really good approach there. We're keeping it generic. We're asking a question, and we're putting the power, keeping the power with the coachee, with the client. Any other ideas? Please put it through while I share what's coming up for you right now. Or tell me more. So there's lots of ways in which we can rephrase that. So as a coach, we must never start our reflections with coming in at the point that this is what I think you should do, or here is what I would do, giving our opinions and thoughts in that space. So we need to ask something that is a question. What's coming up for you right now? What options, resources are available to you? As Oge mentioned, what are some options you could look at here? And as Adele's just put here, what would friends tell you? So a hypothetical question here. What would friends tell you in this situation? So again, it's all about thinking with a question. So if you did have a client that has come and asking you for advice, because this happens a lot of clients, when it's the first one or two sessions, they might not fully understand what coaching is, and they might be expecting you to give them advice. How might you handle that situation without slipping into advice mode as a coach? Because it becomes a lot easier to give the advice when it's being asked for by the client. Let me know in the comments box. How would you handle that situation? So you got a client, they've discussed their problem, they've discussed their goal, and says, what would you do in this scenario? Can you give me some advice? Because this is where feedback can be really powerful. Donna's saying, what advice would you give somebody in this situation? That's a good way to spin it back to them. So a good powerful technique is our reflection here. So if somebody's giving you advice, if somebody is, the client's asking you for advice, asking you to tell them what you would do in that situation, then what essentially we need to do here, what could be quite powerful, is just to reflect something that you've already discussed, already shared. So you've explained to me this, you've explained to me this. How could we look at this in a different way? Or as Donna mentioned, what advice could you give someone in this situation? So at a point where a client is asking for advice, it's really good for us to reflect or summarize what we've already covered in the coaching session, and then ask them a question that kind of helps them see it from a different perspective. But we need to prepare ourselves as coaches where clients do ask us for advice. And finally, the last one that I have in terms of this example is, that sounds like it was a mistake. So you have a situation where a client is sharing something, maybe they deeply regret, something that didn't go so well. We feel like, again, it's our assumption jumping in here, it's our judgment jumping in, and we feel like it's a mistake. So we tell them, that sounds like it was a mistake. What kind of question might we open up a bit of reflection and feed them back to here? What might look like a reflection rather than an opinion? So I'm saying, have you experienced something similar to this before? What worked? Another great question, Donna. Thank you for that. So client in this context has shared something that they regret, something that hasn't gone so well, didn't go as they expected. And our instinct, because we're not a trained coach yet, is telling us that, it sounds like a mistake. And we say that to the client. What is a different way we can approach this through reflecting rather than giving our opinion. They're saying, how can you approach this differently? Yep. Donna saying, knowing what you know now, what would you do differently? Yep, so some good questions being asked here. And what I've got on the screen, so there's lots of different ways. What I've got on the screen isn't the right way. Please don't adopt. What we're trying to do here is get you to think about, instead when your mind's going to jump in with your judgment, jump in with your assumption, jump in with your opinion, how can we think differently? How can we change this? Because it's one thing we need to train as a coach to be able to do. So we're not giving our opinions, we're not giving our judgment. So a simple one here is, what did you learn from that? So if you've got a scenario where a client is sharing something that didn't go so well that they regret, what did you learn from that? What did you take away from the experience? Oge is saying here that I'm hearing that you may have some regret about that action. Have I got that right? Again, another clarification question, if that's what you're hearing. Yep. Brilliant. So it's all about thinking, not to jump in with our bias, not to jump in with our intuition. It's one of the difficult things that we take on board when we're learning to be a coach, because a lot of us jump on board to become coaches because we're great at supporting friends, family members. We like to support others. But what we've done and the habits that we've adopted from giving that support is we tend to give advice. We tend to give opinions. We helped our friends by telling them what we would do in that situation. But as a coach, this is not what we do, because when we give advice or when we lead, what we're actually doing is we're disempowering the individual. We're taking the power away from them. And the purpose of us as a coach, when reflecting back, is not just to act as a mirror, but to also keep the empowerment with the individual, with the client. So every time we ask a question, every time we're putting the options in their hands, the work in their hands, we are keeping them empowered. We're not taking away their power, where they become dependent on our thoughts, dependent on our actions, and they can become self-sufficient and independent on everything that they're doing within their lives and goals and challenges. So here are some final example statements just to close the session. So if you're somebody that really struggles with reflection, struggles how to put it back in the words of the clients, or how to introduce statements into that when you're reflecting back without an opinion or a bias or judgment, here's some example statements for you. So you've said you want to be a leader, but you've also said you're still doing all the work yourself. So here we're feeding back two things that we've heard in the context. The clients share that they want to be a leader, but they've also shared with us that they're doing a lot of work. Then we finish with a question. Remember, the principle is to finish with a question. So what would need to shift for that to change? So here we're stating what we've heard, what we've observed, what's been shared with us, and we're finishing with a question. Next one. What I'm noticing, so again, we're stating what we're observing here with noticing, is that every time you talk about your manager, your energy drops, or there's a shift in your energy. So again, we're observing the pattern here, we're observing the change in body language. And then we ask, what's happening there? So we're finishing with a question. We're open and allowing them to explain what's happening. Because again, when we talked about body language last time, we talked about how a lot of our clients might be unaware of the shift in body language. Not everything might be unconscious or subconscious in terms of the change in their energy. They might not be noticing that. So how do we hold up that mirror and show them that there is a change in energy every time that they talk about their manager, and exploring what's happening there? And finally, so what I'm hearing is that so what I'm hearing is not it sounds like is going to be inserting your opinion, your assumption. It's putting your words in what you think. But saying, so what I'm hearing here is more objective, it's more neutral, is that you know what you need to do, but something is holding you back. What's that something? We're not telling them something's definitely holding you back here. I'm hearing that you know what you need to do. Someone's holding you back. You need to find what it is that's holding you back. It could be this. This is what's holding you back. This is what's holding you back. Again, we're not there to give opinions. We're not there to give advice. So what I'm hearing is that you know what you need to do, but something is holding you back. What's that something? Again, we're finishing with a question. Very, very important. And I just want to finish with a golden rule. So if you're a new coach, if you've just started the program, if you're new to coaching, then I want you to remember this. This is one thing you need to step away when you're reflecting back to your clients, is never begin your reflection with the words, I think or I feel. And I'm going to add in there, or it sounds like. Avoid these three terms, because immediately when you use the word I think, I feel, you're inserting yourself into that reflection. And remember, our role as a coach is to remain objective and neutral when we're feeding back to our clients. Donna's saying here, what one thing can you take away from this that will support you better next time? Brilliant question off the back of the fifth opinion there that we shared earlier on. Thank you so much for that, Donna. Now, if you have any questions, please drop them in the comments box. But reflecting back is one of the core key skills that we need to master as a coach. If you want to learn more between these sessions on Coachology, you can scan the QR code on the screen. That will take you to our Coaching Essentials book, where you can learn coaching, the basics of coaching, the core skills, everything we talked about today in more depth. And it can prepare you and help you understand if coaching is the right path for you. If you don't want to purchase the book, then in the top corner, you can see there's another QR code that will take you to our website. You can find some free resources. We've got lots of resources there for you to explore and to practice, so you can start to think about building your coaching practice and use the free resources that we've got out there. I just want to say, while I'm waiting for a few questions, I just want to say a huge thank you to everybody who's tuned in. It's been really great to connect with you. Apologies with the setup of StreamYard. It's changed. I need to go away after today's session and understand what's happening and make amendments for the future sessions and get a bit more consistency in what we're doing here. But thank you for being here. Thank you everybody who's tuned in, everybody who has contributed with their thoughts, changing opinions into reflections. We really need to think about how we do this practically. I'm not here to give you theory. If you want theory, you can go away and read books. We're here to look at the practical aspects of coaching and how we can start to think differently as a coach and put it into practice into our coaching session. So a huge thank you to everybody who's tuned in. If you're watching the replay, thank you to everybody who's tuned in and stayed quiet as well. I appreciate you all and look forward to seeing you in our next session, where we're going to take this feedback a little bit further. We're going to look at how we can do this more effectively. We're going to be bringing in Razan's mention of patterns and the right times. You know, when I talked about that balance and proportionate, we're going to go deeper into that to understand when the right time in our coaching session to reflect back is. So I look forward to seeing you all then. Have a great week ahead. Thank you so much, guys.